Hey, good morning and welcome to the Mike Murphy podcast. Trying again. I use Riverside for a platform to record my podcasts, and Riverside absolutely sucks. The last one I did regarding my officer candidate school program, which I'm going to talk about today, it stopped. It just stopped at the 12-minute mark, and I couldn't get it to work. So it's something different each week. I hope today's works, and we'll get rolling. So it's been a while. If you remember, I joined the military in December of 1987, went to basic training at Fort Bliss, Texas, off to advanced individual training at Fort Rucker, Alabama. And then I did talk about an experience I had over in South Korea in my third podcast. And now, just to get back into order. So after AIT, I came home in May of 1988. And got married shortly after that, and went off to officer candidate school. And how that came about is my brother-in-law, best friend at the time, Scott Tuttle, he had completed OCS, officer candidate school, and was heading off to Fort Rucker, Alabama for flight school. He was going to become a pilot, a helicopter pilot. And Scott's dad, Dave Tuttle, was also I believe a colonel at the time. And I was around those two quite a bit, obviously Scott and I being best friends. And I believe it was Scott that, again, not only, I guess, took me to Madison, got me hooked up with a military recruiter, but also pushed me towards applying for officer candidate school. And officer candidate school for the state of Wisconsin is located at Camp Williams, Camp Douglas, Wisconsin, Volkfield. As many people know it, and if you drive along the interstate today, the buildings are still there. They're the small ones right along the interstate, but they've changed their purpose. They now serve as soldier readiness processing buildings for soldiers and units getting ready to deploy overseas or somewhere here in the United States. But that's where I went to OCS. The buildings were old. That was the pinnacle, the place that everyone wanted to be and work. It was a great place. It's where the best of the best would come to teach. And where our state officer candidate school program was at the time. Now it's located at Fort McCoy, Wisconsin, in a brand new building. Other OCS or officer candidate school programs that people can go to, the federal program is located at Fort Benning, Georgia. You've got ROTC programs, Reserve Officer Training Corps programs within state universities and such. But I chose to go the state route. Never really knew it existed. I lived, only about 7 or 8 miles from Volkfield, but didn't even know officer candidate school was there. But I found out soon what it was about. So it was, I believe, July of '88 when officer candidate school started. Now, prior to that, I had to submit a packet, an application, and I believe I went up for an interview. You had to be interviewed and selected to go to officer candidate school. And then once I was selected to attend, the program actually consists of a 2-week phase 1 called an annual training. And then you have the course over the next 12, 13, 14 months, weekend drills with tons of stuff to do during those weekends and in between. And then you finish off with another 2-week annual training, which is called phase 3. And mine was done at Volkfield and Fort McCoy. It's changed now where people finish their training. And we'll get into that in later podcasts. But for me, phases 1, 2, and 3 were all at Volkfield and a bit at Fort McCoy when we reached phase 3, which I'll talk about in the future. So phase 1, I believe I drove up on a Friday night. I think I left my car there, and we had to park it the next day near the chapel. And I just bring that up because in future podcasts, I'll talk about soldiers that had their vehicles at officer candidate school and things that would happen if they weren't parked in the correct place or if keys were found or lost or whatever. But I drove my car up, I believe, and slept that night. I was so nervous. We had to wear our Class A uniform. Now, the Class A was the old green uniform where you have your ribbons and your name and all that stuff. Obviously took the jacket off, but I believe I slept in my pants, took the shoes off, slept in my pants and shirt. I was just so nervous and scared of what was going to happen. I'd heard stories about officer candidate school and things that would happen. And it was just, from my understanding, going to be a bitch. And it turned out to be. So day 1, Saturday, woke up. If I can remember, I'm sure we had breakfast, very tense. other candidates there showing up from around the state. And at some time in the morning, we had a formation. And in that formation, I didn't know at the time, but there were over 100 prospective candidates trying to complete OCS, or at least there for phase one. So we had 100 plus start the program. And I vividly recall being in formation, facing the flagpole, which would be, I believe, north, I think. West, I don't know, it doesn't matter. But anyway, we're being addressed by the commandant, who was Colonel Greenwood at the time, Roger Greenwood, great guy. And he was the commandant. I didn't know him prior to OCS, but would find out in later years. A terrific guy, and I worked with his sons. But Colonel Greenwood was addressing us, and at one point, while he was talking to us, he gave us the command to do an about face, which means you turn around, face the opposite direction. And unbeknownst to us, when we turned around, there were about 30 to 40 TAC officers lined up in their Class B uniform on the sidewalk. Now, a TAC officer is the equivalent of a drill sergeant, only these are officers and higher-ranking non-commissioned officers that are the best of the best and selected to train and teach, and TAC stands for Teach, Advise, and Counsel, future prospective leaders. And these men and women were lined up in their Class B uniforms, which mean they had the green tops on, the green dress pants bloused into their boots, tucked into their boots. It just looks tracked. They had belts on, they all had swagger sticks, they had their helmets on with their rank. Very intimidating. And I knew this was the beast. These were the people that were going to make life a living hell for the next couple of weeks. And Colonel Greenwood told us, when we did the about face, he said, take a look. And he gave us another command to turn about face. We were facing him again, Colonel Greenwood. And he said, that's the last time you will ever look at your TAC officers. And a short time later, he released the TAC officers, gave them the command to take charge. And it was holy hell. It was just hell. Those 30 to 40 TAC officers came charging into our formation, just screaming and yelling at everyone. And you came to learn over the course of the next few days that there was nothing you could do to be right. You were never correct on anything, and they overtasked you purposely to see how you would prioritize, if you were decisive, if you'd make the right decision, which, overall wasn't the major thing. I mean, if you made the wrong decision, obviously you wanted to correct it, but they were looking to see how you made decisions, and just overtasking, how you would prioritize and get things done, and delegate was huge. So, they broke us down into our platoons and our squads, and I know my squad had 3 TAC officers assigned to it. And over the course of the next 2 weeks, it was hell. And I'll describe a typical day. We would wake up at 4:00 in the morning to the sound of music playing over the loudspeakers. And it was so loud that the people in downtown Camp Douglas actually complained. And the music that was always played was the Jetsons, the theme song to the Jetsons, the cartoon. And to this day, when I hear that, here's George Jetson, song, it just, PTSD, flashbacks. And that was the first thing we would hear every day. We would get up, dress in our physical fitness uniforms, and fall outside to conduct physical fitness training. A lot of push-ups, sit-ups, different calisthenics and such, and running. And again, constantly being yelled at. There were candidates that would be in charge of physical fitness training, and they would have to plan the night before of what was going to be done. And of course, they would not. They would follow the regulations that the Army puts out, but obviously they couldn't do anything right. We just weren't well versed in that. So if you were in charge of physical fitness training, you were getting your ass chewed, more than likely. After physical fitness training, it was in probably showers, get ready for breakfast. You'd have to change into your battle dress uniform or BDUs, go to breakfast, and again, constantly being yelled at. There would be a group of candidates that would be in charge each day. They would be briefed by the TAC officers the night prior, and then they would have to get together and ensure they knew the training schedule, where they had to be, what uniform they had to be in, times, meet time hacks, get to class on time, so on and so forth. And everything was evaluated, everything. So we'd go to breakfast. We had to do 10 pull-ups before each meal. And you'd go in to eat. You probably had 2 or 3 minutes. And to this day, Jill still yells at me because of how fast I ate, but I think definitely from basic training and officer candidate school where we were being yelled at while eating definitely plays into why I still eat very quickly to this day. So anyway, we'd eat again, a couple of minutes to eat, back outside, and you were probably tasked with a million things. Who knows? I could just remember there was literally no downtime mentally or physically. More than likely, we would grab what we needed for class, and then we'd head up to at the opposite end of where I was billeted. We had trailers, and these were the classrooms. You would get some reprieve in those classrooms. The instructors, again, officers and highly qualified non-commissioned officers, the best of the best, teaching us. You could let your guard down a little bit, but you never knew when a TAC officer could be outside the door, when they would open the door. They were supposed to leave us alone in the classroom so we could learn because everything was tested and we had to pass these tests. But still, every 50 minutes, we'd get a 10-minute break and I'd go outside and it would just be, chaos, hell, earning demerits, doing things wrong, getting yelled at, push-ups, everything. You'd see people in tears, people quitting, so on and so forth. But classroom, usually all day. You take a break, obviously, for lunch. Again, another 10 pull-ups, get in, get out, and get back to your barracks, do what you needed to do. And TAC officers may or may not be there, but they would be screaming and yelling. And again, the people in command, in charge for that day would have to be on their toes to make sure everyone was accounted for, that we were getting to where we needed to be in the right uniform. And again, just nothing, you could do nothing right. So you go back to class all afternoon. Again, breaks every 10 minutes, getting yelled at, and then you go to supper, in the evening to get another 10 pull-ups supper. After supper, depending on the day of week, you may go back to the classroom for a little bit. If it was Saturday night, the middle weekend, you'd go to chapel, and chapel was, getting ready for chapel was terrible because you were all sweaty and in your battle dress uniform all day. The TACs would give you 3, 4, 5 minutes to change into your Class A uniform. Now imagine being in a work uniform all day. You have to get out of that. You're all sweaty. It's hot. The year I went to OCS, the majority of the days were over 100 degrees. And then you would eat, and they'd give you just a few minutes to change into your Class A uniform with your tie and your coat and your ribbons, and everything had to be perfect again. And you had to be ready for chapel, standing out in formation to march up to chapel in just a few minutes. And it was just, you would be released to go change, and people would be digging through their duffel bags to find what they needed. And it never failed that somebody would be yelling out, "I can't find my tie." And to this day, a classmate of mine from OCS and I still joke about, does anyone have a tie? And his response when that would happen would always be, if it was up your ass, you'd know where it was. Somebody would pack wrong. They would have their tie at the bottom of their duffel bag. You'd hate to dump your clothes out because during chapel, the TACs would come down and inspect the barracks. And if your stuff was laying out and your duffel bag was unlocked, it would be thrown all over the place. So just a terrible, a time, when it was time to go to chapel, you had very few minutes to get ready. So that would be on Saturday night. But other nights, there may be, TAC type of training going on. Maybe you would do physical fitness training again, testing, evaluations, who knows. If you were in the chain of command, some point after supper, you would be evaluated, and that would just be a loud screaming. You didn't do anything right. You're the worst of the worst. You're never going to pass OCS. You're a failure type of counseling session. And the TACs, it seemed like they always kept us busy and out of the barracks till about, I can recall going to the barracks like after 10 o'clock at night, and you would just cringe because I vividly recall one evening getting back to the barracks, and it was 22:30, 10:30 at night. Couldn't get in the front door because the TAC officers had inspected the barracks, our barracks, at some point during the day. And they had destroyed the barracks so badly that stuff was on the inside of the building, inside of the door, was barricading the door. So we actually had a candidate or two, a classmate or two, had to crawl through one of the windows and get inside, move whatever was blocking the door so we could all get in. And you would walk in, and the barracks, imagine an F5 tornado that had just gone through there. your stuff, your shoes, your clothes, your bedding, whatever was not locked up would be just thrown all over the place, in the shower, in the bathroom, all over the sleeping area. And so here we are, 10:30 at night, and by the next morning, that barracks had to be inspection ready. And along with that, so that would take hours, and along with that, you would have memorandums that had to be typed. And back then, we did not have computers, and the memorandums had to be error-free. You could not use whiteout. You could not use the correction tape that was inside the computer. So what we would do is we would assign two of our best typists to type all of our memorandums, and you could hear them back there clicking away throughout the night, and it never failed. As they got closer to completing a memorandum, they would start hunting and pecking so they wouldn't make a mistake. And if they didn't make a mistake, you would hear the zip of the paper coming out of the computer or out of the typewriter, and followed by "God damn it," that they made a mistake, and they would have to start over. So a critical tasks, the TAC officers would hold the memorandums up to a light and see if there were any mistakes, and if there were, they would throw it back to you, give you demerits, and you'd have to do it again. So we tried to get them perfect every time. So we'd have a couple people typing. We got smart and started to assign people to clean up the barracks. You always wanted to take care of your own stuff, but we found out you had a better chance of having everything dressed, standardized. If you put, like, for example, two people in charge of the footwear, a couple people in charge of the hanging clothes. Maybe you fixed up your own locker. A couple people in charge of the beds that would go around after you made your bed to inspect it. Divide everybody up so you wouldn't have 30 or so different ways of things being done. You would have the same two people doing the same task, each different task, all throughout the barracks, and that seemed to work. We never passed, but at least it got us closer each day. You would also have a group of candidates that had been in the chain of command that day, so they would have to be out-briefed, and then in-brief the new chain of command who had just gotten their tasks from the TAC officers and are probably feeling pretty nervous because they know what's in store for the next day. So they would be getting an in-brief from the outgoing staff and figure out what worked, what didn't work, and that would take, an hour or so. So imagine getting back to your barracks at 10:30 at night with wake up at 4 in the morning, and you had all of these things to do and absolutely no way of getting them done, but you had to prioritize, get done what you could. And I forced, and I think everyone else did the same thing. Some people would get a few more hours of sleep, but for me, the first 8 days, I had 9 hours of sleep total. And I'll say that again. The first 8 days, I had 9 hours of sleep total. I would force myself to lie down at 10 to 3 in the morning, still not having everything done, but as close as I could get. And at 4 o'clock, the music would go off. So I'd get an hour and 10 minutes of sleep each night. And that was for the first 8 days. And I can literally remember being out doing physical fitness training and doing sit-ups, and you'd come up to do your sit-up, and on the way down, you would fall asleep and hit the ground, and that's what would wake you up again. So tired. And the TAC officers must have found out that this was happening because the middle weekend on Saturday, I can recall I was in taking a shower, and the TACs came in yelling for everyone to get to bed. So I finished my shower. I think we were in bed probably by 8 o'clock, and I don't think you could have a sound from anyone. We were so exhausted. So again, the first 8 days, 9 hours of sleep total, and never having anything done. Demerits were earned. So these were negative comments, negative times you'd be yelled at for maybe your uniform or your appearance was wrong. Maybe you were in the wrong place. Maybe you failed something. Maybe you marched wrong. Who knows? Whatever. You would get demerits. And then throughout the course of phase 2, which I'll talk about in the next podcast, you would have to work off these demerits. And there were a variety of ways you could work them off. But the goal was by the end of phase 1 not to have demerits, but everybody did. I think I was under 100 or close to 100, which wasn't bad. There were some candidates that were in the hundreds of demerits. And obviously they would have to do a ton of things, extra things to work those off before they could earn senior status, which is something that happened again down the road, many months down the road before you could graduate. And I'll talk about that in the future. But, it was just a rough experience, a rough 2 weeks. I was on flag detail. And what that means is I was part of a team. I think there were probably 5 of us that would go out each morning and evening and put up the flag, the U.S. flag, and take down the U.S. flag. And obviously the Army has a way to do it, a standardized way to do that. So we would have to get our noses in the book and read the regulation of how that is done. And then if we had time, we could go out by the flagpole and practice. I don't think we were able to do that too often. There were always TAC officers out there. You were basically in the spotlight because obviously you're a small group putting up the flag. Everyone's out there in formation. All the staff were out there. And so if something went wrong, the TAC officers would be on you like stinking shit, and everyone would see it. It was very embarrassing. But overall, I think we did pretty well. We weren't yelled at too often. My biggest fear, I was one of the guys that clipped the flag onto the clips up the lanyard that, took the flag up the pole. My biggest fear was every time we raised the American flag and marched away, I was so afraid that we put the flag on upside down. We never did, but that was my biggest fear. And when we marched off the field and I had the opportunity and the TAC officers weren't looking, I would always look back to the flagpole and pray to God that flag was correct. And it always was, thankfully. So that was probably my biggest task. Obviously, I was in leadership positions throughout phase 1. I don't recall what they were. I did fairly well. I know I got ranked pretty high by the TACs and my peers after phase 1, which I was thankful for. And, only being in the military for about 6 months, I was pretty proud of that. I'm not tooting my own horn, but I was pretty proud that I did fairly well for those first 2 weeks of phase 1. When we left phase 1, the last weekend, it was graduation for the class ahead of us, and I was on the flag detail to support that, also picked to do that, so I was also proud of that. But these 2 weeks, over the course of OCS, I just want to share this with you before I sign off. We started, as I mentioned, with 100+ candidates in officer candidate school vying to be a second lieutenant. And by the time we graduated, we had 38. And the majority, or obviously a lot of these quit themselves or were kicked out for whatever reason, many different reasons. And so I was pretty proud to make it, and we'll talk about that in phase 3. But I finished as a part of 38. I finished number 4 out of 38. Again, something I was very proud of. Made the confidence list. So tough 2 weeks. This was phase 1 of officer candidate school. And if you're ever again driving by Volk Field and you see those small buildings near the interstate, that's where we held OCS at the time. A lot of things have changed since then. Like I said, they built a brand new building a number of years ago, and it's up at Fort McCoy. And still a part, I still have a very deep appreciation and love for the Wisconsin Military Academy. In future podcasts, I'll talk about how I supported the Wisconsin Military Academy as a TAC officer, as an instructor, as the officer candidate school commander for 5 years, and then as the battalion commander down the road. So very honored and just very appreciative of the time that I had with the Wisconsin Military Academy. So again, this was phase 1 of OCS. No guarantee that you're going to make it through. I did make it through phase 1. Extremely tough. Vividly recall a lot of the terrible things that we went through. The tough times. The days were long, 4 o'clock in the morning till 10 to 3 the next morning, and until the second week when they forced us to go to bed. Now, at officer candidate school, the requirements are 6 hours sleep per night. That is a must that they have to have. Back when I went through, there was no requirement. You just went to you passed out or you had your tasks done, which never happened. But again, a very, very tough course. A lot of great, met a lot of great people, a lot of great classmates, a lot of great TAC officers and instructors. And down the road, after I talk about phase 2 OCS and phase 3 OCS, I was asked to come back as a TAC officer, which I was very proud of. And we'll talk about that in future podcasts. But I appreciate you tuning in. Again, this was phase 1 of OCS. And in the next episode, I'll talk about phase 2, which were the drill weekends, phase 2 of officer candidate school. and what would happen. And then we'll get into phase 3, have some great stories about phase 3 and some things that happened to classmates of mine involving human poop and wood ticks. And we'll get about that. We'll talk about that in future podcasts. So again, appreciate tuning in. And again, I'm doing this basically for my family, so they have my face and voice and story for generations to come. But if you are tuning in and listening, just go down, give it a like, subscribe to the YouTube channel. And I just appreciate you listening. If you want, leave a couple of comments, and we'll go from there. So until next time, thanks for listening. Take care.